Waking up is hard to do. Waking up, an awakening, a spiritual awakening. What's really going on here? I mean, what are we waking up to? And let's face it, waking up is not always pleasant or easy. Sometimes it's really painful. I think the full package contains a whole dark night of the soul thing. But I want to go somewhere else. Let's look at our metaphysic and put it within the context of that. We talked about being, and being was semi-permeable, complexifying and differentiating, and it did this over and over until it created a new order called life. And life, this self-replicating aspect of nature that seemed to come on the scene, also did the semi-permeable complexification, differentiation route. And what did it do? It became aware of itself, consciousness. And so today, I want to suggest that we're each waking. We're all having these little tachistoscopic wakings, these little moments that add up into something quite phenomenal and profound. Waking up to what? Now, I'm going to make some suggestions. Like there are indicators that are kind of showing us that we're ready to awaken at the next level. And that's the piece I want to talk about, level. Because what's happening is it's clear if you look at this metaphysic, if you look at the physics of being, life, and consciousness, there's an evolving, a development, an expanding, a maturing. This whole package is happening. And so I want us to look at if being created and transformed, and it's about transformation. Everything's about transformation. Being transformed into life, and that didn't mean being left. Being is still couched within life. And life itself transformed into consciousness. That doesn't mean life is gone. It means being is couched in life, and life is couched in consciousness. Or maybe the other way around, consciousness couched in life. But what I believe and what I see from my perspective in all my little wakings is that what gets revealed is new orders of understanding, new orders of seeing, new ways of being in relationship. There is a breaking down and breaking up of dogmas long held. There is this concept that seems paradoxical between greater connection and non-attachment that seems to happen at one and the same time. I'm more connected but less involved emotionally with what I'm connected in, and more intently involved. We become more aware, I think, of the oneness of being. And I mean, let's just ask the simple questions. Are you the same now as you were when you were young? How have you changed since then? Why have you changed? How have you changed? As we wake up, again, this oneness comes into view. Our dreams become more real. I think there's an increased empathy, an increased desire of service, and we'll get into more of these through our podcast. But I want us to see that we are, each of us, in the middle of a transformation. That consciousness is doing the same thing with semi-permeability, complexification, and differentiation that life did that created consciousness, that being did that created life. And my friends, you are part of it. You're thinking, you're doing, you're being in relationship, and the way that you monitor that semi-permeability, all of these things add up. So the question is, we are in the middle of a transformation, but what is next? What is next? Consciousness to what? And that's what I want to talk about, because I think there's some clues, but damned if I know. This is just where the mystery hits the fan, if you will. So, Marianne, I'm going to ask you. We're in the middle of this transformation with all these little wakings up. What next?
What next? That is a very good question. And within it is enshrouded the mystery of what's next. And, you know, I think what happens every week when we do these shows, there's I'm amazed at the synchronicity of the things that happen that you're talking about, and that I've just been dealing with this last week. So when you ask the question, are you the same as you were when you were young? Many of us will think back and think, yeah, I'm the same person. And yet I have journal.
Oh dear. Bob, are you still there?
That I'm
still here.
All right.
Am I not here?
Yeah. Go back to your journal statement.
Okay, so the journals. So I'm going back through these journals as I'm reading, and I'm reliving these very, very intense times of my life. And the way I remember it and the way I wrote it are completely different. And I see the progression of my thought. I see the progression of what happened. I see the transformation that happened. And it's hard for me to go back and acknowledge, oh my God, this is really where I was. I was a hot mess. And yet I'm still going through that. I'm still feeling like a bit of a mess, right? And I think that's part of it. So what's next? What's next is the next hot mess that I'm going to live in the moment with and just figure out how to deal with, right? And then do my best. And I am trusting that I am transforming. I'm trusting that I am open to new ways of seeing things and new ways of being in the world. And again, when I go back and I read these things and I go, whoa, man, I have come a long way and messed up, confused. Did I funny?
Okay, we're starting to lose Marianne over and over. Stand by one. So, Bob, how about you? What is next?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And you asked, am I the same as I was when I was young, and so forth. And I agree with Marianne. I've changed a lot, but the core beliefs, the core philosophy is still the same. My deepest core belief is that we're here to answer the question of why we're here. And I keep asking that question, and I keep getting little flashes of understanding, and then come back and the questions keep getting bigger and bigger, and the understanding keeps getting less and less, and then I keep circling around to it. And I think of all of the things that have influenced me in my studies, the whole idea of Zen has been probably the most influential. And that is, and there's a famous saying of, before I was enlightened, I saw the mountains like this, and I saw the trees like this, and so forth. And after I became enlightened, I saw the mountains like this, and I saw the trees. What we're waking up to is the same as what we had before. It's just that we've changed our way of looking at it. And I think you talk about these tachistoscopic wakings, these little wakings happen all the time. We get a little glimpse here and there, but we keep circling around to the big question, which is unanswerable. We're here because we're here. The purpose of life is to live. And all of these Zen-like philosophies have been the things that have kept me going as I continue to ask that same old question over and over again. Well, what am I doing here? Where is my journey leading me to? And during that journey, I've learned that we are all one, and and the purpose of our living is to connect with each other. And those things keep coming back, and those are the answers to the question that don't ever really get completely answered, but along the way it feels better as we learn these little things.
And you used a term a couple times there called circling back. And I think that is telling, because to me, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, this is what it looks like to me. Being gives rise to life. Life gives rise to consciousness, and consciousness gives rise to being. And I wonder if we're not laying out a matrix to be the next order. And that's why I talk about moving to new orders of understanding. What we're looking at, what we're seeing and experiencing doesn't change, but our way of allowing it into us and the context in which we allow it to find gets larger. And it's like a tapestry. If you pull back, you see, whoa, this is a whole cool pattern. It's a mandala. It's not just a little jutting thing. And you begin to see these higher orders of understanding, which inform us that the mystery's a lot freaking bigger than we ever could have imagined. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Well, I was going to say exactly, because when I'm looking back at some of these questions I was asking 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they are the same questions. The answers have changed. The answers that I found then that were able to get me through what it was I needed to go through and to get me to that next order have changed. And yet the questions haven't. And I think we're at that place of the question of what is life for. It's to live, and to me that is so perfectly profound. And that's until I get to that next place, and maybe there'll be an answer after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you both bring up something that's important for us to reiterate and lay down. We are different and the same. We are the same thread, but perhaps a different texture, a different color, but it's the same thread, and there's a continuity there. And I'm going to suggest that continuity is what's most important to the organism, because that creates security, predictability, a whole series of things, which can either free us or imprison us. And again, that's part of waking up, is those who think I need to break out of this pattern in order to see the next order, versus those of us who say I need to create some kind of regularity that that can offer some baseline for me to live so I can explore deeper. And Bob, something you said, we're expanding, we're evolving. We are always moving to new orders of understanding. I think a lot of times we don't want to move to a new order of understanding, and we create a whole series of backlashes, if you will, so that we don't have to face those changes. But the changes are inevitable. So two things. One, I wanted to just say different but the same. And also, consciousness is doing something. And I know my life is to live. I get all these little pieces. But if being did life and life did consciousness, what in God's name is consciousness doing? And that's what I really want our listeners to address, because it's anxiety producing when you deal with that, and it's better if we're all in it together. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, it's hard to see it from the inside out when you're talking about consciousness, because from the inside out, you feel like you're the same person. You're the same. Your consciousness is still there, but it really has changed, as Mary Ann was saying, looking into the journals. Consciousness itself used to be the consciousness of being in a tribe. Then the consciousness of the individual developed, and how the individual had his or her own unique path. And now we're getting, through technology and so forth, here's the three of us talking across country. And we're sharing consciousness. We're changing each other's consciousness just by interacting with each other. And now you take that onto a larger scale and go global, and you have the exchange of information is happening so fast and is changing consciousness such that we really don't have the ability right now to see it from the inside out, because it's happening. It's like, can a fish see water? It's happening to all of us together. But I think we can see reflections of the way we change, the way empathy grows, for example. in our culture. It used to be that, there was no such thing as child labor laws. Now we all realize, well, you can't work a child to death. It's not a moral thing to do. And that's a new development within our societal consciousness within just the last 100 years. So
and
consciousness itself is changing.
Yeah, and Bob, you the fish in the water, what we're talking about is a mirror. You see, we don't have a mirror that is sufficient to our times. And I think that that's an important piece to understand, that language itself and the different sciences create different mirrors, different ways to look at ourselves. And let's face it, the cognitive sciences are pretty new.
They're in their infancy, yes.
Marianne?
Honestly, I'm a little tongue-tied for the moment. I'm processing. One of the things that I think is really important is this is an ongoing process. It's continual, and as we sit here and talk, Bob, you're absolutely right. We're changing each other, right? And we are growing and learning just from the things that we say here, and just multiply that by every interaction you have in your life and when you go out. And then when you get into the media influence and you talk about the technology, how many people are being influenced by those stories that are going out? And I was so heartened to see that we're starting to see stories shift away from people being heartless, cruel, and mean to each other to we're helping each other. We are in this together, and to start seeing some of those stories start coming about.
Yeah.
And those are the incremental changes that, the child labor laws did not change overnight. They went, people fought for that. And so I think the whole idea of, are we transforming personally? I think yes, but then we also have, that's our choice. We also have a choice to not change. And Redhawk, you mentioned that earlier about, you put in those routines, you put in those structures, and you want to make sure that you can predict what's going to happen in the next moment.
Okay. You bring up some stuff, and I we don't have a whole lot of time in the next part of the podcast. I really want us to address it, because what it is how do we know an awakening is in the air? And Marianne, you bring out a point that I think is very important. Awakening is not just an individual thing. It's we're doing it together. And Bob, you intoned this with the child labor laws. We were waking together. We're trying to wake together about this subtle racism. So how do we know when there's an awakening in the air and we can become more intentionally involved in our own waking, in our own transformation? Now, here's a list of things that I have come up with, and I'm just going to lay them out, and you all can make a note on the ones that you want to address. One, you feel disconnected. If you start feeling disconnected, Carl Jung was all over this one. Something's in the air. Two, we're starting to reevaluate our beliefs. Three, our dreams become more vivid. Our relationships start shifting. They don't quite mean the same thing they did before. We find ourselves becoming more intuitive. We find ourselves becoming more sensitive to inauthenticity. We also acknowledge that everyone has their own path, and we allow them their own path. We don't put our path saying, if I could only explain it to them, they would get it, when the fact is they're thinking, if I could only explain it to me, I would get it, because I've been in that place with 1,000 different people, and believe me, we haven't gotten it yet. So another one is we want to be of service. If you start feeling alone, that's an indicator. If there's a change in habit, a heightened senses, physical symptoms sometimes, if our outlook on the world begins to change. This is a big one, this next one, an increase in empathy and a display of compassion, a newfound curiosity. And the one that is really big to me is greater déjà vus and synchronicities. And Marianne, you brought up the synchronicity piece. So I wanted to make sure we put that at the front of the list and say, listen to these cues, my friends. Listen to them in yourself and dare to pull the thread, no matter how anxiety producing they might be. And there's a new world at the end of that thread. Am I making sense here? I mean, I'm laying out a whole different thing.
You just described many aspects of my life. So, yes, you're making perfect sense to me. How about you, Bob?
I think it's true of all of us to different degrees. But I think that especially when you talk about synchronicities, the heart of synchronicity is your own consciousness and your awareness of those synchronicities. And of course, there's a big question. Are you causing the synchronicities, or the synchronicities out there affecting you?
Yeah.
So, and it's both, as I always say about everything else that we discuss. It's a balance between the two. And as we change, we recognize those more often than we did before, because our consciousness has changed and given us the ability or the awareness to see them.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. It's a larger order of understanding allows us to be sensitive to a whole new order of messages or whatever
Awareness,
being sent to us.
Yeah. Well, and here's a little bit of self-disclosure here. It used to be when I would notice these synchronicities, they would make me fearful. I would be afraid because I would be worried about what's going on here. How can this be happening? And I've come to see it. The universe is talking to you, and you can listen or you can not listen. But that conversation is not, and that's where we had talked about this a week or two ago about the difference between fear and love. And when you start to think that the universe is out to get you versus the universe or God or whatever you want to say is loving you, and that we're all part of this huge connection, those synchronicities become love notes. They become guideposts. They become validation for you're going the wrong way or you're going the right way, or try this or try that. This is a journey of expansion or constriction. And so those things now I can view those as loving, right?
And I want to suggest, and this is my own stuff coming in, I think the universe is totally indifferent. I think life is pretty indifferent. I think consciousness grew something that was new, and that is what was known as a chemical bond in being, what was known as a symphonic relationship that creates life and allows life to be. That has translated into a language of compassion, love, empathy, at the human and consciousness level. So I think that the human being brings a whole new ball game to the arena, if you will.
Yes, we bring love or fear.
Yeah, and I would quibble a little bit on your word indifferent when you talk about the universe, because I don't think we can make that determination one way or the other. What I have found in my journey is that the universe, whatever it is, that the mystery, is trying to communicate with us through our own consciousness. And when we have a certain type of thought, a certain impetus that leads us in a certain direction, there are rules the universe has set up, and I'm doing air quotes here for our listeners. There are rules that if we go too far in any one direction, we need to pull back. We need to find the opposite to balance it out. And if we don't, then it becomes detrimental to our own self-being. And those rules are what the universe is trying to communicate to us. That's what science has been trying to do for all of these 400 years, 500 years now, is identify the rules. And once we identify the rules, then we can play the game.
But the rules are different in their translation into, the biolife versus, physics versus human life where...
yeah, they are, but they're also following the same similar patterns.
Now, I will agree with that. I think they do. I think, again, they're higher orders. The patterns are higher orders. So consciousness is looking in on life and being and going, what the fuck? Basically, now that I said that word, I have to hit the explicit button on my podcast. But I think that is the leading question, at least in my life, of facing the mystery with at least some sense of humility and humor, because it's pretty anxiety producing if you don't approach it that way.
Yeah.
Well, I think those two words are key, humility and humor, because that will take you a lot further towards transformation than anything else, I think.
And I want us to get that it is, and Bob, your word balance is pretty important here, between individual and the wholeness of being. There is, we are, don't confuse your cosmic address with who you are. You are the whole thing. And I know that, you have to maybe address that intellectually at first and live with it before it seeps in. But we are that. And yet, my individuality does have a certain autonomy, if you will, that allows me to embrace things in new and fresh ways. And that, to me, is what the expanding of consciousness is. Now, speaking of expanding of consciousness, we're at the end of our time. So, Marianne, final comments? Being, life, consciousness. What next? Is there any way of getting around the mystery and saying this is it?
Well, I think we need to be brave enough to embrace that mystery. You had mentioned a little bit earlier about the universe being indifferent, and what popped into my head when you said that was the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. And so there are things that, regardless of who you are, what you choose, you are subject to. And Bob, you brought out those laws. So we're all subject to these same laws, these same things. But within that, we have choices. And I think that let's all be brave and go out there and just live the mystery.
Amen.
Yeah.
Bob, final comments?
Yeah, the journey is never ending. I saw a quote, I believe it's attributed to Krishna. It said that when you're alive, I'm part of you, and when you die, you're part of me. And that our journey, we're going through this life journey here, and we're learning, and we're growing, and we're awakening, and we're questioning, and looking at the universe. There's going to be more. We don't know what it's going to be, but the journey is going to keep going. Whether our physical body keeps going, that's we know that's not going to happen, but the journey will continue.
Amen. And my friends, this whole concept of journey, we've tried to deal with that in the past with different shows not too long ago. And one of the things we've learned is that, as Bob was speaking, I was thinking Moody Blues, turning, spinning, Catherine wheeling, forever changing, there's no beginning, by the Moody Blues. I believe in my deepest heart, and I hate to say believe, but it looks to me in my deepest heart like we are clearly part of something greater than ourselves. And that balance between the whole and the individual, wow, that is so big. Because the fact is, this cosmic address, as I've said, is not who I am. This is where I'm living. this life. This is the tree I'm roosting in. So how do we get that balance between the whole and the part? What is that? You know, in holography, each piece of the film contains the whole from a different angle, if you will. Huxley said in his perennial philosophy that when we all get to the top of the mountain, we'll see that we're all part of the same thing. We've just come up different paths. You know, if you're on the north side of the mountain, you can talk about moss all day long, but the people on the south side of the mountain aren't going to get it because they never see any moss. So we're each coming up the mountain from a different point of view, and we each have to somehow balance this individual organism with the very fabric that gave rise to me and in which I have to exist. The individual and the whole, the oneness of being and the pieces of the oneness of being that seem to think they are autonomous unto themselves. I don't know. We hope you'll join us, and in all things, may the oneness of being be all over you, and many blessings in your journey.